Good afternoon. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Celebrating Men in Rare Epilepsies Making a Difference. My name is Glenn Lloyd. I am the Executive Director and CEO of the Epilepsy Foundation Minnesota. And we are all glad you're here as we are fierce advocates for people touched by epilepsies. We planned this event during the month of June, which celebrates National Men's Health. Without further ado, want to get started with an excellent group of panelists today. Jeff D'Angelo, Bo Bigelow, Mike Graglia, and Justin West are all here with us, who are representing organizations within our Rare Epilepsies Network. I'd love for each one of you to go around and introduce yourself, be able to share with us what rare epilepsy is a part of your journey, and a quick snapshot of what does that rare epilepsy look like, and what are some of the standard experiences that you've seen for those within your community?
Hi, Glenn. Thanks for having me. So my name is Mike Graglia. I lead the SynGAP Research Fund. The fund is dedicated to working on children who are afflicted with SynGAP 1. I think you asked for a snapshot of what that looks like.
Yes.
SynGAP 1 starts initially as global delays, and then it very quickly turns into absence seizures. Absence seizures are very easy to miss, particularly in kids who have been deemed to be slow. And then in some of our more severe kids, they very quickly get to drop seizures and present as a classic serious epilepsy case. But most of our kids have a lot of absence and eye rolls that sometimes get missed. Between the delays and then the motor issues and then the seizures, hopefully at some point they get diagnosed through genetic testing. But if they get missed, which unfortunately happens, a lot of our kids who continue to only have absence seizures start having drops in puberty and adulthood, and that's when they get caught. So it's a disease that, like I think all my colleagues on the screen, it affects the central nervous system, it affects functioning on all levels, and it eventually totally changes the life of the child and the whole family.
Thanks, Mike, and we're so glad you're here to share with us more about SynGAP, and I believe that this is one of the awareness months attached to SynGAP, so we look forward to hearing more from you. Jeff, good afternoon. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jeff D'Angelo. I'm the founder of the Champion Research Foundation. I have a proud father of JJ, who's 8 years old, and I'll give you a quick snapshot. It sounds similar as Mike discussed. I imagine we all have a lot of similarities, but the main characteristic is intellectual disability. My son was globally delayed. It was actually misdiagnosed with a cerebral palsy diagnosis. And you start to see some of our children. We have a subset of kids that have seizures. They have focal stares, myoclonic seizures. Those are, and they're very hard to detect. I think every family that gets an EEG with our kids, they're never caught on any imaging. So it's always sort of a battle with diagnosing and detecting seizures.
Thanks, Jeff, and thank you for being with us this afternoon. Bo, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. My name is Bo Bigelow, and I run the Foundation for USP7 related diseases. USP7 is our gene, and the name of our disease is HAO-FOUNTAIN Syndrome. It just got a name, so we're really excited about that. I wish I knew more about the way seizures present in our kids. Our disease sounds a lot like CHAMP1 and SynGAP in that global developmental delay, intellectual disability, autism, kind of across the board. And as far as the seizures, we really don't know how many of our kids have them. For many years, in fact, my wife and I kind of watched from the sidelines and listened to other parents, like on Facebook, and when we would meet at conferences and we would hear about their seizures, and it sounded really difficult. And we just kind of said, wow, we're really lucky in the sense that our Tess, she's now 12 years old, Tess doesn't have those. And that's what we thought for many years until she had her first seizure a few years ago. And so that was kind of a surprise for us, just a focal seizure kind of out of nowhere that we didn't expect at all. And so we're in the process right now, actually this summer, of trying to sort of nail down in our group. We have 138 patients total. Tess was number 8. So we're really still trying to find more patients and get some more information. Who has seizures? What do they look like? And so we're hoping to make some progress on that actually in Germany in a couple of weeks at our phenotyping study.
Well, we're so glad you're here with us. And Justin, good afternoon to you.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Justin West. I have a 5-year-old son, Andrew, who has a KCNT1 mutation. Our foundation is the KCNT1 Epilepsy Foundation. There's two main phenotypes for our kids. There's kids like Andrew who start having seizures in the first few either days or months of life. It's a pretty catastrophic diagnosis. Kids like Andrew never learn to walk or talk. A lot of challenges, obviously, raising a really sick child like that. Andrew probably spent 100 days the first year of his life in and out of various hospitals. He's doing okay, but it's relative to how, I guess, how some of the other kids are doing. But very challenging management, very taxing. My wife and I are both physicians, and even with the training we have, very hard to keep a child like Andrew healthy. The other phenotype is kids who usually start getting seizures in their teens. They're often pretty high functional. They don't have the same intellectual disability that our kids have, but they have some pretty severe, sometimes psychiatric issues. Their seizures happen mostly during sleep, whereas our seizures happen pretty much all the time. So we have anywhere from 10 to 100 seizures a day in our population. So we've got a number of initiatives with our foundation, and we're trying to problem solve.
Well, thank you all for your introductions, and I want to dive right in as we're talking about National Men's Health that brought us all together as we're talking about the rare epilepsies. And my question is, in round robin, as you introduced yourself, let's get into a topic of particular interest right now going on in our world, which is around mental health and how we are addressing stress in our lives. And I'd imagine, as I've talked with a few of you, around what it means to be a caregiver to a broad range of impacts on your life. Want to ask, how are you thinking through your health in support and leadership around caregiving? Mike, Jeff, Bo, Justin, thoughts? What does it look like to be addressing your health, including your mental health?
I'll just say this to kind of open up, is that even in preparation towards the topic of this talk and mental health, I tend to try to not think about my own mental health very much. I try to put it on the backside. I don't know if that's something guys just naturally tend to do. With that being said, I think me and my wife try to do is just kind of make time for some mental breaks, and it's not easy because I'm sure, like we all. We're the caregiver, we're running foundation, where life gets in the way. There's very few opportunities where you could set some time for yourself. And I've at least made a point to try to do that over the last few months, but I'm hoping you guys have some better secrets. Definitely something I need to work on.
I mean, I would say from my experience, I think about my longevity all the time with respect to caring for my healthy kids, and even more intensely as it relates to Andrew. We're around now to take care of him, but I guess my wife and I look at it, we have this responsibility to care for him as long as we can so that he doesn't become somebody else's burden. We're older parents, we started late because of medical school. And so it's something I think about probably too much, maybe on a daily basis, whether it's diet choices, exercise choices, doing the things that I can try to do to extend longevity. It takes a lot of energy to care for any kid, but sick kids in particular are challenging. I mean, Andrew is totally immobile. He relies on us 100% to get out of a bed, for feeding himself, bathing. He's like having a 3-month-old for the rest of your life. So, it puts a burden on your back. It puts a burden on, your body to care for a child like that. And no one's stepping in to show up with, with some exceptions. You're not getting a lot of help. I mean, you're essentially doing this on your own. And what does that look like to go from your 40s to your 50s and your 60s and your 70s, to, depending on how much time you have with your child? I mean, it can be daunting. From the mental health point of view, I see a therapist, and we talk about Andrew all the time. I mean, he is front and center in those conversations. We have conversations about what is best for Andrew and how we process it, how our children process it. I think that probably not enough of us. I probably put it off too long. It would have been helpful if I'd started this process with a therapist 5 years ago. But I think that everybody in our community should be doing it. I think the idea that we can do this without third-party help where they're not intimately tied to, your family, I think is probably unrealistic.
Oh man, so many of the things you said, Justin, man, it's just like you're speaking my language here. My wife and I joke, we just have to live forever. We can't die. Like we have to just be here. So like, what do you do to extend your life? You do all the things. You work out and you eat good stuff and you take care of yourself. And I think it's hard though to think in those terms, like to envision a future that you're not in. And so I'm right there with you. And I also seeing a therapist, also waited too long, definitely should have been doing that sooner, but just talking things out and just kind of processing it and saying like, how do I feel about this? Something, we went to the ER and weren't expecting to, and it was scary. And so like, how do I feel about that? And what now? And kind of just sorting through those questions. I think it's important to have help for that. And that's critical for me. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll pile on the therapy thing. You got to have it. I do. And I'm grateful for it every week. This is a really hard life. The two other things that I would say that haven't been said though, is number one, I think Jeff, you alluded to this a little bit. We're dads who lead foundations, right? We're problem solvers. And it's an interesting coping strategy. It's great. I think the work we all do is important, and it's a coping strategy. And there's sometimes when I'm working so hard on this disease, because it's the only thing I know how to do, but then out of nowhere, I meet a family and I get a glimpse of what my son's life will look like in 10 years or in 5 years or in 2 years. And I'm not ready for it. And it reminds me that my emotions are fragile around this. And, it brings back the mental health issues because it just rocks my world. And so I think mental health for all caregivers is critical, and men are extra bad at it. We're not trained from birth to feel stuff. And so I think for me, it's an area that I continue to work on and focus on, because this work is all consuming and everyone is struggling with it. And then the other point I'll make is today, my son's service dog arrived, and we're very fortunate in our community to have someone who makes dogs for our kids, or trains dogs, whatever you do to these dogs. And, she said to me, I know that raising these kids is hard. And the rule with service dogs is the service dog only takes care of the patient. She's like, but for you guys, I make an exception. She's like, I know, I've seen enough SynGAP parents to know that the service dog can also do pressure therapy for you. I was like, awesome. Anything to help me feel better as I face I echo everything you guys said. Yeah.
Mike, I want to pick up on that point because just on a chance for us to catch up in our discussions, you made a really, I think, helpful observation. I want to hear us talk about it as a group, which is that men are conditioned to approach life in ways that women are not. And it seems that there is a lot of similarities, at least in the stories that have been shared about you all's lives, that I want you to touch on, which is how did you navigate these really challenging diagnoses and the process to get to diagnosis, and then the everyday context of dealing with the grief and the anger and the disappointment around moving forward and finding a way to wake up the next day and go after it all over again. My question is, what is you all's thoughts about in your communities? What role do men have? And maybe just reflect on, what role did you take on as a man in your journey with the rare epilepsies in loving support of your child? Like, what does it look like for you as a man? And do you see that play out often in your worlds? I'll take it back around the horn and go the opposite way, right? Like, so Mike, how about you touch on that first? And we love to have our little people drop in and say hello with us. But Mike, your thoughts?
John, you're live. So don't say anything obnoxious. I think, you just raised so many issues. But the first observation I will make, and I say it to every couple who is just diagnosed, is that moms get it first. Moms get it first. John, go find food, John. Moms get it first, and dads are in denial first, right? So I think what I did, and what I've seen a lot of couples in my community do, is I argued with my wife. I was like, he's just slow. He'll catch up. It's going to be okay, So I think I always see the moms get it first, and the moms always get it first. The moms advocate for testing first, and the moms are like, what can I do first? But then I think and then you touched on two other things, and I'll let the rest of the panel cover the rest because you brought up so much. One of those things is, as time goes on, the anger and the grief sneak up on you. I think that's what I was talking about before. You're so busy taking care of your kid, running your household, someone somewhere's got to make some money. You're doing all these things, and then out of nowhere, I'm in this for 4 years. I'm in deep. Out of nowhere, the grief just hits you like a wave, right? It's like, oh, you're on the playground and you see your kid not doing something and it's a kid 2 years younger does it. Or you see a kid who's 10 years advanced, or you just see something and it brings up this whole, reminds you of what you've missed. And it's scary. And then you got to go into, you get therapist, your partner, whatever, deal with that. But then the third observation I'll make is, I think all couples, regardless of gender, tend to specialize, right? Like if my wife says she's going to cook something, I'm like, no, don't do it. You're good at so much, but cooking is not one of them, right? And there's certain things that she would never let me do, like talk to other people a lot in our house. But, all couples specialize. And in rare disease, I think it's the same, right? We're all here because we have agreed with our partner, we're going to do some more leadership on the foundation, and you're going to do something else that's really important to our family. And so, and that bridges into the whole issue of how does your partnership work? That's a whole other conversation. But I think I'll just say that the points I would flag for men in rare up front is we tend to get it slower. I certainly did. And then over time, the grief hits us harder because we are just less in touch with our emotions out the door based on the society we're in. I'll mute myself and John now.
Yeah, well, Mike touched on some things. Jeff, Bo, Justin, what's your reflections? What is the trigger? Is there a memory where you go back in time and say, I remember not getting it? First, do you resonate with Mike's points?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of getting it, I will say from the time that Andrew had his first seizure, Lisa noticed it. She took videos of it. She sent it to me. I didn't recognize it at all. But she put it on a Facebook group of women physicians, and right away somebody picked it up and said, that's a seizure, go to the ER. So from day one, this whole community of people is seeing something that I either refused to see or couldn't see. And then, throughout that, I guess, the process, I think, I agree with what Mike said in terms of roles. I mean, we all fill different roles. I think that, my wife became Andrew's constant companion and caregiver, and I kind of took care of him by getting online and looking for trials and looking for drugs and talking to strangers instead of talking to and spending time with my baby. And it's something that we fight about because everybody, has their own love language or whatever it is. And Lisa's is to give care directly to my child. And I guess, I'm not as good at it. When I do sit with him, it crushes my soul. And so in some ways, what she's doing, and probably always what she's doing, is much harder to do what we do, and to run a business essentially, and to have objective conversations with scientists and go and problem solve. It's a daunting task, but it's emotionally easy. The part about sitting with your sick kid and watching them seize and watching these terrible things happen to their bodies, that's hard. Then there's the dichotomy, then I become the caregiver in our house to our other two healthy kids. And I spend a lot of time with them because a constant thought is, we can't ignore them. They're intensely aware of the attention they do or don't get. And then, so that becomes another issue between the two caregivers is, who gets to spend time with the healthy kid and who takes care of the sick kid. So there's so many dynamics. I mean, we can't even begin to touch on, but a small percentage of all these. But I think it's tough for people, whatever your gender is, to find your role. I mean, I think it's always a partnership, and you can have no sick kids and you have to find those roles, and you kind of super specialize in your house about the things you're going to do. But this one leads to a lot of friction, I would say. The natural attraction you have to your role can lead to, I think, a lot of fighting, a lot of chaos in your household. And that's where I think going back to mental health, I think having somebody for you, somebody for your spouse, and then somebody for you as a team who can negotiate that and is really probably very helpful.
I want to touch on something Mike said earlier that, as men, I think sometimes we're like, we're going to fix things, right? Like I'm going to work on this problem. I'm a problem solver. I'm going to just fix this. And I really think, in a way, that the pandemic brought on the ability and the prevalence of these video calls, right? And I think of that as a really good thing, because when you go on PubMed and you find a publication that somebody just did on your gene, like, a couple days later, you can have a face-to-face conversation with them wherever they live in the world. And so I've done that during the pandemic a lot, but I think what happens is you realize, like, there's always more papers and there's always more people that you could talk to. And if you don't watch it, you can just work all the time. You can just like sink into this hole of like making appointments and having meetings, and because you could always do more, right? You could always fight harder, and you could, like, you're in a race against time. Time is brain, like Mike always says. So, you could always be working, and then suddenly you look up and you're like, I'm always working. That's all I do. Like, so I think burnout is really a thing. I think, like, as men, we just don't want to like pick our head up. We just want to, like, put your head down, you do the work, you try to fix the thing. And it's not always good. It's not always the best thing. Rest is important. Taking breaks, being with your family, Justin, like you said, I think just work. And so I think for me, the solution, like the real thing that has been saving me is my partner, my business partner, Daniel DeFabio, has really drawn me into the more creative side of all of this, like the idea of telling your story. He kind of strong-armed me into making a film about Tess years ago, and it was the beginning of this partnership where we're just making stuff all the time about our own diseases, but helping other people make their own videos and share their videos. Like Jeff's film about JJ is on our channel. Mike has a bunch of stuff about SynGAP on our channel. That the creative side of it, I think it's still work, but I just feel like it's just kind of an outlet. It's more of an outlet. You're not trying to necessarily fix anything. You just really want to get stories out there, and try to just spread the word, help everybody spread the word, I guess.
I think you guys covered a lot there. I don't have much to add to that. You definitely both inspired me to do that video after speaking with you, man. You've done some amazing things, and I think staying busy. The only thing I'll add is sort of staying active and busy and focused sort of helps me not marinate on. And I'll allude to what Mike said before, is seeing what 10 years, 15 years down the road is like. And I think that personally drives me to try to stay focused on what I'm doing with Foundation and my son and being active, because that's what's tough, is when I start thinking about the future and I don't necessarily have a solution mentally for where to go with that.
Well, let's talk about that, Jeff, because I think you lead to a really important next step around you all's problem solving and the work that you've all taken on to support your community, to advocate with doctors, to be thinking about how we can make a difference for those who have these debilitating diagnoses, the family, the caregivers, the support team. What does it look like for you all in your advocacy that you recommend that people, even as you think about it, man, I wish I had started and thought about X? Or is it like, I think, Mike, you had alluded to this maybe earlier, that the real key is to find your people, right? Because this world is incredibly diverse. It's been merged together from technology. But how did you all go about, and how do you go about it on a regular basis of advocating for your rare epilepsy, for your diagnosis? Bo, you talk about just getting a diagnosis and having a name, and its importance. Talk to me about the advocacy work that you've been doing and how that plays into a recommendation or some thoughts about how others can go to find either your people or something to feel productive, like you're moving a problem forward.
I think for me, it's just been all about telling my story in as many ways and in as many places as I can. Really early on, I met this guy, Stuart, who had been doing this for a really long time. And he and I had this very frank conversation where I was like, I need to make people care about Tess. And he's like, yeah, well, that's your job now, is to make people care. And I said, okay, well, great. How do I do that? How do I make them care? And he said, like you do, like you did here today at this event we were at. He's like, you just show up and you start to talk about her and talk about what she's all about. And if you can have her with you so people can meet her, that's the best scenario. But if she's not with you, have people get to know her. She's a person. So she's not just her diagnosis or her symptoms. You know, how is Tess a person? What is she all about? And what is she like? You know, paint a picture for people of what she's all about. And once they understand that she's a person who, she's 12 and she's in 6th grade and she loves bubbles and she loves music and she loves to dance. And so once people know all those things, they can't ignore you. They can't brush you aside. They, you know, there's this person in front of them, this beautiful, wonderful 12-year-old girl, and they can't ignore you. They have to care. You give them no choice.
Others, advocacy, how do you do it? What does it look like? How does that play out in helping folks find themselves, find
Justin,
that was
Jeff, Justin, Jeff, I could talk about this ad nauseum, so I'm gonna let you guys go first. If you have anything you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same idea, you know, get our message out there. And I think that the advocacy side of it is something that I don't, it doesn't come naturally to me. It's much easier for me to cold call scientists and email people in the medical community because it's sort of a space that I live in and I know how to speak that language and to write that language. And, you know, the other element is something that I think we have a long way to go in terms of figuring out. But I will say that just sort of, I guess, accidentally going down that pathway that Bo is describing of talking about yourselves and showing up. And, you know, the more networking we do, the more outreach we get, and we get invited to, you know, speak at events like this, or we get invited to, you know, what are the other panels. And the more we communicate in general about our disease, the more people hear about it, whether they're in the scientific community, the academic community, you know, creating a Facebook community for people to find us. I mean, we have such a rare disease that anybody with our diagnosis, doesn't matter what country or in the world, you're going to put in those, you know, 5 things, KCNT1, and, you know, and you know, they're desperate to find something. So just having anything out there, you know, is like passive advocacy, I guess. You know, we have a lot to learn from people like Mike. I think Mike does this exceptionally well. Bo, I'm going to start, you know, looking at everything, all the work that you do from what I'm learning today. But I think, you know, there are some blueprints out there that we've just not, I think, done a great job, I think, mimicking some of those blueprints. But I think participation of any form is helpful.
Yeah, I'll throw in a little bit before I let Mike take it away, but I feel the same way. Just letting your, you know, we always say being a voice for the voiceless. When we got my son's diagnosis, the first thing we did was Google CHAMP1, and there's literally a handful of papers, and it was one of the most daunting 3 weeks of me and my wife's life. Like, it rocks your world, and we're like, we just, you think about every family going forward if they're going to have the exact same experience, and who, the first thing my wife said was who's going to champion the champs, right? So any chance, I'm not a big fan of public speaking, of throwing myself out there. I'm not in for anything like that, but we've said if we're not going to do it, who else is? And that's been my approach. So I didn't want to make a video. Bo convinced me to do it. It's not my style, but it comes with the mission in hand.
Yeah, and I'll say, you know, just it's probably like I'm probably about to break a major rule of panels. I'm gonna argue with one of my panelists, but I think, Justin, to the extent you're don't see yourself as a general public advocate, having an advocate who's effective in the medical community is a gift for any community. I have a colleague, Hans Schlecht, who does that for us. And I couldn't do what I do if I didn't have him focusing on that. And I think what I would say is very similar to what Jeff said. Getting diagnosed was really terrifying because the things I found online were not good. And I was not pleased with them. And I said, this can't go on. And so I have a strong penchant to be like, this needs to be fixed and I'm going to fix it. And that gets me in trouble a lot, but it also helped me do this very quickly. And I think, and I also am, you know, a shameless thief of good ideas, right? So Bo has this wonderful Stronger Every Day podcast about his daughter, Tess. And that taught me the idea of, first, you can have a podcast in Rare. And second, you can just do 7 minutes a week. And actually I listen to Bo's podcast because it's only 7 minutes a week. So I sort of took those two ideas and I made SynGAP 10, which is my 10-minute weekly podcast to my community. to update them, because what I learned as I just sort of took on this notion of advocacy of this community's got to get on one page. People don't understand what's going on. Things are happening too fast. How do I educate them? And I would write these beautiful long blogs that nobody would read. And if they did read them, they probably didn't understand. Everybody didn't understand them, right? Bo didn't read them. So, but if you put them on a podcast, people get it, right? And so my one thought is, I think a podcast is a really effective tool for advocacy, especially in this day and age. And I credit my podcast with being, fathered by Bo and mothered by Effie Parks. So Effie Parks does an amazing podcast about our community that we've all listened to, Once Upon a Gene. And then there's a bunch of other stuff I could say about how to do advocacy, but I've already said it. So Nasha and I did a podcast with Effie Parks, because we were getting calls all the time. I think at some point I've got, just like I called Bo in the early days. I think Justin called me. I think other people have called me and been like, how did you do this? And one day Nasha and I were joking. We're like, do you get this call every month? I get this call every month. And so we called Effie and we're like, let's just do a podcast. So everything else I would say to answer your question is in the podcast that I just put in the comments. And it's, I think there's a lot of thoughts, but the underlying theme is, I used to think of this work as a speedboat. We got to get in a speedboat. We got to get across the lake to a cure. And that's wrong. There isn't a speedboat fast enough. The lake is too big. It's too damn hard for one person to do. And now I think of this work, I think it's better described as sitting alone, feels alone, in a lighthouse. And you're just sending out the signal on the internet, and you're trying to get the clinicians and the families and the researchers and the companies and the allies to all come to know where you are and give a damn, forgive the expression, about your gene and about this kind of rare epilepsy. So that's the visual I use for this advocacy work. You got to be able to sit in your lighthouse alone and just slog away. So the emotionally stunted male is pretty good at that, frankly. We just put our head down and work. It takes a toll on our hearts and probably our families and our partners. And so we should do better about that. But I really do think it's lonely, grueling, thankless work. If anyone's out there planning on starting their own foundation, I'm not trying to dress it up.
Well, let's go in a little bit deeper, Mike, around not dressing it up. I think that you all, and Mike in particular, you shared something pretty frank, disturbing, and frustrating, which was in the context of who are your people and who comes to your foundation for help. And my question to you all is, obviously you lead your organization. So my presumption is a bunch of men would be in on the journey with you. And I want to explore and hear once again about how do you see men participating in the rare space? And frankly, we can acknowledge that there's an absence of men in the rare space. And I want to hear from you all. I think it's only responsible to talk about where the burden ultimately lies with who is in your community. Mike, I know in the SynGAP community, you have a clear answer to that question. So it may be only directed at you, but I think I want to put that on the table for us to discuss. So Mike, who shows up in your community, and where are the men or where aren't they?
So I think there's a lot of good men in our community. I don't want to be thought of as having said that there are no good men in our community. There's a ton of them. And anyone who's ever set up a special needs trust has sat across the table from a lawyer who has looked at them and said, you do understand that 80% of marriages of people with special needs children end in divorce, right? So have you guys, we are, as lawyers, it's our job to advise you that this could go badly and la, 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 la. I've had that meeting more than once and I hate it every time. So it's true that people with special needs kids, especially our kids who are like uber special needs, take a huge toll on marriages. It's also true that when people get divorced, very often, especially in the case of special needs, I'm sure there's data around this, the moms end up with the kids more often than not. So I think what you're alluding to is what I shared with you before is I am often amazed when I meet single moms in our community that certain dads saw this special needs kid and this wonderful woman they were married to, and they tapped out. And I don't want to use pejorative language to describe what these men have done. I think we all have our limits, and we all, at certain points, just can't handle something life throws at us. And I think that's what happened in these cases. These men just couldn't cope with what they thought was going to happen compared to what was happening. And so there are, I would expect in all special needs communities, but I can certainly vouch for mine, a number of single moms raising wonderful children in really hard circumstances. And I will also say there are some dads in our community who have stepped up in a big way. I think I've actually got, the counterfactual is I've got at least 2 single dads where, something happened to mom and I don't want to get too far down that path. But the observation is the generalization, the safe generalization is, I said at the top, I was in denial at first. I got over my denial and got into problem solving. I think some dads maybe don't get over the denial or maybe don't get over the grief. And that's not compatible with taking care of a kid who gets sicker every year. And so if you're not able emotionally to get over the denial and the grief, and your kid's getting sicker and bigger and your life's getting harder, the logical outcome, it's not logical, but the outcome is that you exit. And it's hard and it's heartbreaking. And I think part of running a rare disease community is advocating on the science side, raising money, building community, but also helping getting to know each other as families and supporting each other. And the more you get to know each other, the more you come across really hard stories about how this disease has taken a horrific burden on people's lives, including their marriages. I hope I haven't said too much, or it's a delicate topic, but I think I've spoken enough generality that I've spoken to it honestly.
And I appreciate that. And that's exactly what my estimation is of as well, what the burden is in our special needs community in the rare epilepsies, is there is a ton to have to consider, which is to also highlight that as epilepsies impact all across identities and stages of life, whether it's about how much money you earn or where you live, it can impact any person. I think that the underlying question that I'll bring to the top is, how is this playing out as well when we see race and ethnicity have disproportionately the inequities in all of our health spaces? And I believe, Justin, coming from the medical side, I believe that you said something to me that I want you to just highlight for me, which is on getting to a diagnosis and the importance of getting to a diagnosis. And that being one inequity that we can easily presume is why we don't see more communities of color and people of color getting to their people based around their life experience in the diagnosis. Your thoughts, Justin? I mean, I know I probably said a lot of it, but I want to hear it from you.
I mean, I think that something that we're taught since medical school is that there's a disparity in terms of access to care. It's not something that I've studied in particular, but it's something that we're all aware of, whether it's access to mammography for women of color, access to mammograms for people who don't have English as their first language. There's a lot of inequity, I think, in medicine, and I think that what in our personal experience, my wife and I are both physicians, and I will say that our experience in Andrew's diagnostic odyssey is gives you some insight as to what other people, I guess, can expect. And that is, we were 2 physicians who showed up with our seizing son to the local hospital where my father worked, where I work currently. And, so if anybody is going to get VIP service, if anybody's going to get the full court press on ordering every lab, every study that could be, it's going to be this 2-doctor, multi-generational physician sort of family. And our diagnosis was delayed by 5 months. It took months and months and months of frustrating conversations to get a gene panel ordered for us. And we know as physicians the words to use, how to advocate, how to apply pressure, how to apply your leverage. And we couldn't get that. And, I remember distinctly having conversations with my wife throughout that process is, if this is the best care that you provide to your colleagues, what do people out there who are not in medicine do? And then you could go down, different levels. What do people in different socioeconomic classes do? I think that it's amazing that I think that there's probably a massive number of people with genetic epilepsies that have not been diagnosed because of inadequate access to testing, or access to testing, but it's not being applied as liberally as it could be. So, yes, our experience sort of spoke to the fact if this is the experience of two doctor families having, it's a major cause of concern for the rest of our global community, and what kind of healthcare they must be getting. Not to say there's not great doctors, not to say there's not great advocates, but we were massively disappointed by our experience.
Well, to that point, I don't want to just stay on this because we're getting some great questions in the chat. But I think that one of the things that we can advocate for all together is the more we encourage people to go through the process and know the resources available to them to get to a diagnosis, the more we can help put the appropriate supports around people through the journey. So a couple questions in the chat, and I'll ask the first, and this is for all of you as panelists, particularly framed around how do you build supports? Let me make sure I get the question right here. Lisa asked, how do you build supports for the siblings of children who have rare epilepsies? She talks about her experience, and she just wants to affirm that she wants life to be fulfilling and does not want them, I'm presuming the children, to become overwhelmed as they become an adult, and sees how the impacts were on the family and their parents. So how do you help folks navigate the sibling support for the family? Jeff, Mike, Bo, Justin?
Well, I can tell you what my therapist told me last week, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's timely.
Yeah, I mean, we have this conversation just the other day, and her feedback was these kids are kids, always understand more than we give them credit for. They understand it at ages earlier than we give them credit for it. They're very acutely aware of the emotional state of their parents and the stresses that their parents are going under. And her suggestion was to make our kids part of these conversations about how, about our son Andrew. How do you feel about Andrew? This is how daddy feels about Andrew. Yes, I thought the right thing was to show them a strong father who didn't take no for an answer, was going to fight, and never look weak. I thought that was the best model I could show them. And she said, that's not really the way you do it. They have to see that this is impacting you emotionally, and they should see that it makes you sad and see that it's wearing you out, and you need to be more emotionally honest with them. They can handle it. So it's something that's kind of new to us, and it's something that we haven't exactly figured out, but it's a pathway that I think will maybe be fruitful for us. But it's something I think about all the time. How the kids handle being teased. There's so many parts of childhood that are going to be more extreme for them by having such a disabled child in the family. But for them, Andrew's normal. I mean, they grew up with a brother these are his abilities. So I think that they have a capacity to process it in a way that I think is maybe more mature and robust than we give them credit for. But I think just making them part of that conversation and not hiding from issues. It's the easiest thing is just to pretend everything's okay, put on a movie and Netflix and have fun with your family that night. The harder thing is to sit down and have conversations about how does everybody feel and how do we all feel about Andrew. But I think that's just like the work we do for our foundation is important. That is just as important, if maybe not more important, because if your foundation is not strong, you can't be a powerful advocate in what we're doing on the business side of this disease process. Sorry, just my 2 cents.
I don't know how relevant this is to the topic, but just to comment on what you said, Justin, I would say if you want to know how to treat a special needs kid, you look at Sibling. And I think my daughter's 4 years old, and we try to have these conversations with her, and she is much more receptive to these sort of conversations than I ever would have thought. So I just wanted to throw that one point in.
I think we were put in this position based on, Justin, just to go off what you were saying, that we kind of didn't have a choice but to bring our son into the conversation, because on both of the big seizures that our daughter had here at home, he was right there. He saw it all going down, and it was a situation where we found Tess in the morning after a seizure had happened, and so she wasn't wasn't responsive, wasn't coming around. So she's on the floor, and my wife has a suction unit. It is trying to clear her airway, really get her breathing again. And there's no hiding that, it's right there on the floor, on the living room floor of our house. And my son is there taking it all in and watching it. And so I'll never forget the last time that happened. I got on the phone, 911, ambulance came, got tests. My wife got in the ambulance and they left. And we were getting in the car, my son and I, to drive behind the ambulance. And I was about to start the car. And I turned to him and I said, "Are you okay?" And he responded, I think very reasonably, saying, "Not at all. Like, there's nothing okay about what just happened and what we all just saw. And like, very much not okay, like not." And, I didn't have an answer in that moment. And I'm still working on this. I think having the conversations is important, but I think I always want to have the answer and solve it. And sometimes these things just can't be solved. This is just like a hard thing that happened, and you witnessed it, and now you're in it and you're part of it, and just trying to give him the space to talk about it if he wants to.
Yeah, I ditto. And I've seen, being in touch with my community, I see the older siblings, they generally turn out pretty well. But I'll say for the SynGAPian kids, my little boy gets his butt kicked by his very aggressive older brother pretty savagely, pretty frequently. And he goes right back in, not for another round, but to go take care of his brother. Like, the notion that he spontaneously receives a lot of aggression and that he is responsible for this kid who's 5 years older and 50 pounds heavier than him, and he's on it. Those thoughts do not seem at odds in his brain. And I don't know. I marvel at my neurotypical SynGAP sibling as much as I stress out about my SynGAPian. And I'm just glad I haven't, because the future would be a lot more terrifying if I didn't.
Want to follow up with another question in the chat, and I think we have two more before we're going to come close to the top of the hour. Sally asked, "How do you connect with your spouse, or how do you stay connected?" Might be another way to be asked. Who wants to start on this one?
Not it.
I'm going to give a real quick answer to this, just because I kind of was going that way before when you asked how I take care of myself. We all kind of discussed, we don't have a lot of help. We don't have a huge team of people that are helping or giving us time to ourselves. We don't get that. And it'd be great to take her on dates and stuff, but that's really not in the cards for us that very often. So we try to make and don't get any implications or get any ideas. We have a date night, usually on our floor, because we don't wake up the kids on Friday nights, and we get takeout and we hang out and talk. And it's one of the few times in a busy, crazy week where we sit down and listen to each other. And that honestly is one of the few game-changing things I could bring to this table right now, is that we take an hour or two, if we're not like on the verge of passing out most nights, just to talk to each other. So that's all I got.
Jeff, that's great. We my wife and I try to do that too. We purposely make it a space. I don't know if you guys do this, where you can't talk about arrangements or like plan. There's no agenda. Like, oh, can I pick up so and so on Thursday? We got to do like no. Like, none of that stuff is going to be part of the date night, right?
We're constantly stopping each other from bringing up the do not talk about list. And if this sounds horrible, sorry, but even our kids, we try to listen. We can't talk about our kids. We talk about our son JJ all day, every day. We can't talk about JJ for 1 hour. 1 hour, we just got to stop. No champ one. I was like, no champ thing, please. 1 hour.
Mike, Justin, any other suggestions or thoughts?
No, I think Justin mentioned at the top, he's like, in addition to having a therapist each, it's probably good to have a therapist together. I think that was you, Justin. That was the last conversation my wife and I had. She's like, maybe we should get a therapist. And I was like, sure. When are we going to schedule that? But it's the right answer. The relationship takes a toll, and it's too precious to let it suffer. So something's got to be done. But I don't have a satisfying answer. Right now, she's working hard because she worked hard, and I'm working hard on the foundation, and that's our life at this moment.
Yeah. Paul has, I think, our final question for this webinar, and it is, your children are all still pretty young. In your communities, do you see changes in men's engagement and attitude as their children get into adulthood?
I would make the comment that, and this may not be gender specific, that parents tend to be a little more engaged when their kids are diagnosed younger. I guess you can apply that to fathers as well. That being said, we do have a few elderly fathers that their children are in their 20s and 30s, and they like to contribute input. They seem a little more apt to share their experience, especially because we have a young community. Our disease was linked to disabilities in 2015. So a lot of our kids seem to have diagnoses that just in the last couple of years are younger kids. All of the other families have teenagers. And so again, it's a hard one to answer, but I would say depending on when they receive the diagnosis, they might be a little more apt to engage with our community.
We have only a couple of adult patients that we even know of, and I haven't gotten a chance to engage with those guys, those dads, much at all yet. What I see them doing, I mean, their kids are moving towards various degrees of independent living, and I think there's a lot of what they do and say is about dignity and making sure that their child is allowed to do whatever it is they're able to do, and I just noticed there's sort of they're very interested in sort of the language around, making those plans for their kids and basically preserving their dignity, the way that they talk about them. That's just, it's very limited, my experience with those older dads, but that's what I've been seeing.
Yeah, and we have a handful of older parents of older patients, and I'm racking my brain for a dad who's engaged there. I don't know. It's really hard to make generalizations, because I think one thing, Jeff, you hit it on the head. If a kid is already teenager or later, the family's already gone through the grief. They've already accepted, they had to accept at some level that things aren't normal. And then they get this genetic diagnosis, and they may or may not even engage in the community, right? Like, it's important to know that our lens is really only those people who we see through our community. So there's a whole population of people who are probably doing just fine and have made the decision, it is what it is, I'm going to keep going. So I don't have a vision to that. But for the communities I see, I think every special needs kid, as they get older, the family goes from trying to figure out how to manage to maintaining whatever equilibrium they've attained. And then within every partnership that's intact, one parent really focuses on, I'm going to take care of this, manage care for this child. And the other parent focuses on, I'm going to make sure that we're leaving enough money behind that this kid is taken care of, and I got enough money to pay the mortgage and feed the family and keep health insurance. And it's very real. So I think I don't want to be up here seen as like I do not want to be misunderstood as saying anything like all dads are a mess in this bit. There's some who bail, and there's some dads who are just really busy working hard to keep their family supported. And then the mom focuses on managing care. And sometimes it's the other way around. But it's such a tricky topic. Yeah, sorry. I don't know if that was an answer as much as a word salad.
Listen, sometimes word salads, there's a whole lot of nuggets of truth in them sprinkled throughout. I will say, as we come to the end of this, I do want to give all of you the opportunity to go around. And one of the things that I'm being mindful, even in my approach, is to acknowledge that I think Justin and Jeff and Mike and Bo, as we prepared for this, we talked about how you four aren't superhumans or supermen. You are in it. That's what you are. You're in it. So I'd like to hear, as we wrap up, what are you working on right now that is bringing you some level of satisfaction and enjoyment along the journey? Is there something right now that you're doing as we wrap up and close out that you're feeling really positive about? or something you're proud of, because I want to end on the first word of our webinar, which is celebrate. Anything you can say, I feel good about that we're making a difference in our community. Bo, you lean forward, so I'm going to you first because the others I can tell are in thought.
Okay. I don't have a success story yet to go along with this, but I talked earlier about my partner, Daniel DeFabio, and we are trying to create some content around this life, what it's like, what it feels like, how hard it is. And we have been working for a while on a series, a drama series, and we want it to be about what it's like to be a single parent and how you could possibly do this on your own. It's not our experience. I'm married and Daniel's married, but we recognize that it's just got to be almost impossible to do by yourself. And so we just have been kind of exploring that. What does it feel like? How could it possibly work? And but also celebrating the person, the person in the story who has the disease, celebrating them, making them human, telling their story in a way that makes them visible.
That's awesome, Bo. And you're right. I didn't want it to be about successes. I wanted it to be about celebrating where you are in the journey, and you nailed it. Mike, Jeff, Justin, any final thoughts about something that is just inspiring, or that you can point to and say, I'm feeling really like this is what I was meant to be doing as I'm in it?
I mean, for me, it's just, I've worked nonstop on SRF for 2 years. I quit my job 2 years ago and have just been doing this. It feels like my organization is growing a little bit, and I'm now having volunteers. There are things that I did every single week and was like, oh my God, can I do this forever? And other volunteers are doing them. And so it just feels like SRF is maturing as a volunteer-led organization that is getting things done. And if I get hit by a truck tomorrow, I know that there'll be someone out there banging the drum for SynGAP. So that just feels good. Just the work is, and it's intrinsically satisfying, and I'm enjoying it.
Well, as we are now done with the questions and the Q&A, I want to thank everyone who was able to participate with us today. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your really want to say thank you to Justin and Jeff for coming along on this work and taking an hour out of your time to talk about your journey and some of your thoughts. Want to continue to say thank you for standing in and continuing to support all of your beautiful families and your children and all the complexities that every day brings to that work. And ways that we can support you were dropped into the chat. I want to encourage people to go learn more and continue to support these foundations as they support our rare epilepsies community. I want to say thank you again to the Rare Epilepsies Network and Eileen Miller for hosting this webinar. I'd also like to acknowledge the folks that are behind the scenes, led by Annika and Sarah and Alyssa, and then Eileen, who made this go so seamlessly and smooth today. Finally, we hope you will get seizure first aid certified. You can do that at the Epilepsy Foundation. You can learn more there. And we're just so grateful for all of you being here. This is with deep appreciation for the invitation to come and have this conversation. With that, Jeff, Bo, Mike, Justin, have a great afternoon. Thanks for being here, everyone. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you all very much.